Resident Evil is on fire, with Resident Evil Requiem surprising even Capcom by achieving over 1 million wish lists across both Steam and PlayStation 5. You wouldn't be wrong in thinking that this next game will likely be one of the best performing Resident Evils out of the gate. Resident Evil is Capcom's most successful franchise in the company's long history, and I thought now that Capcom has released their updated sales figures for the Resident Evil series, thanks to their April 2025 press release and their more recent fiscal year 2026 quarter 3 sales results, let's rank these games based on their sales. Here's a little bit of a spoiler right out of the gate with the latest fiscal report, and we can see the incredible Devil May Cry 5 shattering 10 million units sold, thanks in large part with it being not only a banger of a game, but it also likely saw a big boost in sales from the anime adaptation that series recently got, hence why the DMC collection made it onto this list. Back to Resident Evil, with the recent remakes absolutely dominating the charts, there's no wonder that Capcom is committed to pumping out more of the remakes, and you can learn all about what the next several remakes may be by watching this video, linked in the description. But here, we're looking at the raw data to see just how popular many of these games really are, and some of these games' popularity may shock you. We are looking at the vast majority of Resident Evil titles ever made available, including lesser known titles like Resident Evil The Mercenaries 3D, Dead Aim, and more. But we're not going to be covering the online only titles, mobile games, pachinko games, etc. One thing of note before we begin: the number of sales a game has achieved does not reflect a game's quality. You are going to see some games here that may surprise you with how high or low they are in the ranking, and just know that you alone are the one to make that judgment if a game is good for you or not. This ranking was procured from Capcom's website and VGSales.com, since Capcom's website only includes games that have sold at least 1 million copies. You can find my sources linked in the description at your convenience. The OG RE4, RE5, and RE6 have been the best-selling games in the franchise for years, but can the newer mainline entries and remakes dethrone these older games? I mean, this recent fiscal year report shows some pretty impressive numbers for these more recent Resident Evil games if you ask me, but you'll just have to find out. That said, we've got 25 games to go through, and let's waste no more time, so show your support by boulder punching that like button, and let's get straight into this list. Coming in dead last as the Resident Evil game that sold the least amount of copies, a game that has the word dead in the title, mind you, Resident Evil Dead Aim comes in with 40,000 total copies sold. With an interesting blend of third-person traversal with first-person shooting, this unique shooter was one of the rare Resident Evil titles that had PS2 light gun support. This unique hybrid of the two systems made this game pretty memorable for those who played the Resident Evil Survivor series, but ultimately underperformed when compared to the other first-person Resident Evil titles that came before it. In Nat 24, with 119,000 copies sold, is the second Resident Evil Survivor title, Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica. Unlike Dead Aim that came after it, Survivor 2 Code Veronica plays solely in first person, tasking players to play through sections based off Code Veronica in a first-person shooter format with more of an emphasis on the action over the horror. The game also had light gun support, which was deemed the best way to play this game. While the Survivor game features the setting adapted from Resident Evil Code Veronica, featuring enemies and characters from that game, its condensed nature doesn't make it a proper substitute for those who haven't played Code Veronica. Rather, it fittingly serves as a companion piece. Interestingly, this game sold considerably better than Dead Aim, even though the game never saw a release in North America. Resident Evil The Dark Side Chronicles is next, with having sold 145,000 units. This follow-up to Resident Evil The Umbrella Chronicles is a terrific light gun style game made for the Wii and later ported to the PS3 via a compilation pack. Featuring a plethora of campaigns, including my personal favorite with Jack Krauser and Leon S. Kennedy in the Operation Javier chapter, there's a lot of game here to enjoy, especially if you are a fan of the Resident Evil light gun style games. It's too bad the game sold much less than the Umbrella Chronicles, because I wouldn't doubt we would have seen more Resident Evil titles in this style of game. Do you like the Mercenaries mode? Like, do you want an entire game featuring the Mercenaries? Well, here you go, with Resident Evil The Mercenaries 3D for the 3DS having sold 166,000 copies. I had an awesome time with this one, as this one was one of the earlier 3DS titles. Choose between an incredible amount of Resident Evil characters across tons of different maps spanning the franchise, and you have a fun arcade-style game that you can take with you on the go. I'm curious to see how well this game would perform if it were available on more platforms, but hey, if you've got a 3DS or an emulator, definitely go check this one out. Resident Evil Outbreak File 2 is next, coming in at around 200,000 units sold. Adding 5 new scenarios with the original 8 characters returning from Resident Evil Outbreak, this game puts players back in the T-virus infested Raccoon City. Serving more as an expansion than an entirely new game, it's understandable that this game managed to sell a fraction of what Resident Evil Outbreak sold. That said, Outbreak is an awesome game, and if Capcom are thinking about more Resident Evil multiplayer games in the future, the Outbreak series is one worth looking back to for inspiration. And the final first-person shooter Resident Evil title, Resident Evil Survivor for the original PlayStation, comes in at number 20, with 484,000 games sold. The one that started the Survivor series, this PS1 game deviated from what Resident Evil was known for at the time, and instead pit players against a lot more zombies and enemies from Resident Evil in a first-person shooter format. For regions outside of the North American release, players could use a light gun controller to shoot at enemies. It really is a unique game, and having sold just shy of 500,000 copies for this new style of Resident Evil game, Capcom greenlit more titles like this, but those titles that eventually released never were able to live up to the sales of the game that started this new format. Resident Evil The Umbrella Chronicles took the first-person format but stuck solely to traditional light gun gameplay, and it paid off. Selling 1.3 million copies in its lifetime, this Resident Evil game is the most successful light gun style Resident Evil game by a large margin. Focusing on numerous campaigns following classic encounters and moments from the earlier Resident Evil games, like the train sequence from Resident Evil 0 and Hunk's 4th survivor mode from Resident Evil 2 to name but a few, this game had a lot of excellent shooting to be had and was made more fun with a friend in 2-player co-op. The game was later released on the PS3 for its Move controller support in a compilation with its sequel, Resident Evil The Dark Side Chronicles. Resident Evil Outbreak brought cooperative play to the Resident Evil franchise and was considered a success, having sold 1.4 million copies. Bringing to the table 8 characters with unique abilities, a variety of missions set within Raccoon City during the events of Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3, and sporting both single-player and cooperative play, this Resident Evil game is often considered the best multiplayer Resident Evil game among those who played it. In today's climate, with the internet being readily available, a remake or a game similar to this style would probably do quite well, as this was one of the premier console games to feature online multiplayer on the PS2. Resident Evil Code Veronica, the game many of us would love to see remade, comes in with 2.54 million units sold. I am grouping the original Dreamcast game with Resident Evil Code Veronica X, an enhanced version of the original, because they are largely the same game, with Code Veronica X just with slightly better graphics sporting some additional cutscenes. Taking place on Rockford Island amidst a T-virus outbreak, players take control of Claire and Chris Redfield in this memorable Resident Evil game. First pioneering camera angles that would track the player as they move about the play space instead of the static camera angles the series was previously known for, this was considered a big leap for the series at the time. True to Resident Evil fashion, this game also features some of the most memorable and corny voice acting, solidifying this one as an instant classic and one that would definitely benefit from a remake. The squad-based third-person shooter in Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City landed this title a sales figure of 2.8 million. Taking place during the events of Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3, Operation Raccoon City was a non-canon game that had players shoot down hordes of zombies across Raccoon City in squad-based third-person shooting. Across the game, there are 12 playable characters sporting unique loadouts and features some scenarios that series fans know quite well, most notably being Hunk's USS Alpha team on his mission to secure the G-Virus from the scientist William Birkin. While many did not enjoy the game, we at least got Hunk here, so give him some love by taking a look at this video going into his badass backstory. Coming in at 3.5 million units sold, the original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis was an action blockbuster that cranked both the number of zombies and the tension to unseen heights in the series at that point. Following Jill Valentine as she tries to escape the wrath of Nemesis hunting her down all throughout Raccoon City in a plot that runs parallel to the events of Resident Evil 2, RE3 is a much adored game that wrapped up the original Resident Evil trilogy nicely. It just so happens to have featured the greatest jump scare in all of Resident Evil, and if you'd like to know more about the scariest moments in the series, definitely consider checking this video out here on your screen. Make sure to bring some popcorn. Another banger and an excellent follow-up to Revelations, Resident Evil Revelations 2 attracted even more players with its 3.7 million units sold. Releasing episodically when it first launched, Revelations 2 proved that an intricate co-op experience can do quite well in Resident Evil, with players controlling Claire Redfield and a few other supporting characters as they make their way through eerie settings like dense forests, asylums, and dilapidated villages. Revelations 2 introduced to players some of the most haunting and twisted designs in Resident Evil, with the T-Phobos virus, a virus that mutates its victims after extreme exposure to stress and fear. Want to learn more about it? Check out this video as we go over the deadliest viruses and infections throughout all of Resident Evil. Bringing the claustrophobic and tight corridors back into Resident Evil, Resident Evil Revelations found success with 4 million units sold. An excellent game that took full advantage of the 3DS when it launched, the game has been ported and enhanced to other platforms since, and has been winning fans over with its great gameplay, intriguing and haunting setting, creepy enemy designs, and introducing us to the T-Abyss virus and its haunting lore. This game is great, and I definitely recommend picking it up if you are in the mood for some modern Resident Evil with a classic feel. Speaking of bad viruses, the T-Virus and especially the G-Virus come in here aplenty, with the original Resident Evil 2 having sold 4.96 million copies. Resident Evil 2 is survival horror perfection, introducing players to franchise veterans like Leon S. Kennedy and Claire Redfield for the first time. Resident Evil 2 features 2 complete and distinct campaigns with incredible replayability, featuring some of the most iconic settings in all of survival horror. Its remake is great, and so is the original, so it's hard to imagine how this game didn't sell as well as the original that started it all. Resident Evil 0 comes in with 5.05 million units sold, a respectable number seeing as the original GameCube release sold only 1.25 million, with the rest of the sales being held up by the PS3 and PS4 era HD remasters. Following Rebecca Chambers and partner Billy Cohen, Resident Evil 0 takes place before the events of the first game. This is a challenging one, tasking players to manage resources across these 2 different characters, overcoming all manner of hostile enemies. It would be cool to see this game get a remake, seeing as it is one of the most overlooked in the entire franchise. As Resident Evil 0 is the first game chronologically in the franchise, the one that started it all, Resident Evil, is perhaps the most significant. It is known as the father of survival horror video games after all. Selling a whopping 5.3 million units, Resident Evil, along with its Director's Cut editions and the often forgotten version for the Nintendo DS, Resident Evil Deadly Silence, all made the original Resident Evil land where it is today. Resident Evil was a fantastic game, introducing players to many of the characters we know and love today, like Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Barry Burton, and Albert Wesker, to name but a few. There truly was never a game like it at the time, and while the game can still be enjoyed today, its remake improves upon the original game in nearly every conceivable way. Speaking of the remake, Resident Evil Remake, the 2002 remake of the original game, managed to sell 6.1 million copies. Like Resident Evil 0, Resident Evil Remake launched exclusively on the GameCube for its release and managed to sell 1.35 million copies. but sold much better when the game was ultimately remastered and re-released for the PS3 and PS4 era of platforms, along with the Wii release. Resident Evil Remake is fantastic. While still maintaining the classic feel of the original trilogy with its tank controls and fixed camera perspectives, the graphics were greatly enhanced, adding new enemy types into the mix, a new side story featuring one of the most haunting sections in Resident Evil with Lisa Trevor, and more quality of life updates. Resident Evil Remake is pretty great. While some may not give such praise to this remake, Resident Evil 3 Remake has sold 10 million units to date as of December 2024. An action blockbuster like its original counterpart, but missing some key components from that game, Resident Evil 3 Remake is still an enjoyable game. It's got great action, the game looks great, and it introduces some of the newer fans to Jill's chapter of the Raccoon City incident. It is certainly worth a play for those who haven't played it yet, seeing as the game constantly gets featured in sales. The most recent Resident Evil game as of 2025, we have 2023's Resident Evil 4 Remake, with sales of over 10.6 million units as of July 2025 in Capcom's fiscal year 2026 Quarter 3 report. This is a beast of a game and will undoubtedly be hanging out in the top spots in a year or two, as this game is the fastest selling Resident Evil game of all time. With the original Resident Evil 4 being known as perhaps the most pivotal game in the series, responsible for bringing tremendous popularity to the series with its greater focus on action, Resident Evil 4 Remake has a really good shot at becoming the best-selling game in the series in due time. It's a juggernaut, and the sales speak for themselves. It's simply a phenomenal Resident Evil game. The latest of the mainline Resident Evil games, Resident Evil Village, sits comfortably at 12.2 million units sold. This game is currently experiencing faster sales than the rest of the series, likely due to this game being the current mainline Resident Evil title before RE Requiem releases next year. So it's expected to see sales of Village ramp up ahead of the incredibly ambitious Resident Evil 9. Resident Evil Village is the second chapter of Ethan Winter's saga, except this time we find him and his family in a remote village in Europe with some truly unruly villains. Featuring a solid mix of action with some incredible horror elements in isolated spots, RE Village is an amalgamation of various parts of Resident Evil, proving to be a memorable journey and doubly so if played in VR. Breaking the top 5 and coming in at just under 15 million units, Resident Evil 6 sits comfortably at 14.7 million units sold. This incredibly ambitious game introduced to us 4 unique campaigns with co-op, an incredible mercenaries mode, and the C-Virus, one of the most lethal ever featured in the series. Taking place in a variety of locations with fan-favorite characters, RE6 does a lot, but to many, doesn't do it right. I had a good time with the game, and although I wouldn't say it's among my favorites, it's definitely worth checking out. Did I mention that Resident Evil 6's Mercenaries mode kicks ass? I don't think we've seen that mode hit the highs it did since this one. This game has sold incredibly well over the years, thanks to its availability on just about every platform right now. Alright, this one may come as a surprise to you, but even with being on almost every single platform out there, the original Resident Evil 4 comes in tied with Resident Evil 6 with a whopping 14.7 million units sold. This thing is still selling pretty well, seeing as it's available on just about every platform out there, so this, along with its remake, will undoubtedly continue to climb. RE4 was made available on just about every platform under the sun, from its original GameCube release to the PS2, PS3 era, PS4 era, PC, Wii, even mobile devices, and the MetaQuest 2 for VR. This game is everywhere, and is an incredible game at that. This was the game that truly shifted directions for Capcom and saved the franchise, with every Resident Evil game performing a bit worse until Resident Evil 4 released. This game single-handedly gave birth to modern third-person shooters and brought Resident Evil to scores of people who otherwise weren't interested in Resident Evil prior. While not everyone loved the direction it went with its 4th mainline entry, RE4 is an absolute classic and is a big reason why RE5 sold so exceptionally well. Talk about a complete 180 from Resident Evil 4, and you get Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. With a very commendable 15.4 million units sold, Resident Evil 7 was a true reinvention of the franchise, and its incredible sales tale speaks for itself. Taking the perspective into first person while going back to the survival horror elements established in the first few games in the series, Resident Evil 7 was the breath of fresh air we were all craving. The new direction it went in, along with the memorable encounters with the frenzied bakers across their mansion and beyond in the southern bayous, made this Resident Evil game one of the most successful Resident Evil titles of all time. This direction paid off big time for Capcom, and so too did the next one. And that leaves us with the final two games, Resident Evil 2 Remake and Resident Evil 5. As of July 2025, history was made when Resident Evil 5, historically known as the best-selling Resident Evil game of all time, slipped into second place, as Resident Evil 2 Remake inched past it for the crown. Coming in at a very respectable 15.5 million units sold, we have Resident Evil 5, one of the most contested entries in the entire franchise. Just go on over to Capcom's website and add up every version of the game sold, and you'll arrive at this number. Or even easier, head over to VGSales.com and they'll have it aggregated for you. Having sold 9.6 million units from the PS3 and Xbox 360 versions alone, with a couple million from the Gold Edition for those platforms, add on top the PC release, and now the PS4 and Xbox One remasters, Resident Evil 5 is still a beast to be reckoned with its impressive sales. Now, we're gonna be looking at a future where this game will continue to slip as the newer mainline and remake titles continue to sell at higher paces, as the recent mainline titles and remakes have essentially erased the gap. But as it stands, Resident Evil 5 is still selling relatively well to this day, and love it or hate it, we can all agree that this game is still pretty fun and the co-op makes it all the better. And coming in at number 1 with the distinction of being the best-selling Resident Evil game of all time as of July 2025, the remake that started the modern Resident Evil remakes we've come to know today, Resident Evil 2 Remake struck early 2019 with as much ferocity as Mr. X being denied entry into this safe room. Selling an incredible 15.9 million units, Resident Evil 2 Remake remade easily one of the best Resident Evil games out there and presented it in the third-person over-the-shoulder format. Completely remade from the ground up, RE2 Remake sports completely redone graphics, new gameplay, and various tweaks to bosses and areas from the original. It may not be a one-to-one remake, but this game is incredible and masterfully recreates Leon and Claire's campaigns for modern systems. Yeah, I too missed the B scenarios of the original, but hey, beggars can't be choosers. There's no denying Resident Evil 2 Remake is a damn fine game. Now that you know what are currently the best-selling games in Resident Evil, I want you to let me know what surprised you most about this list. Did you think certain games were going to be ranking higher or lower than they currently are? With Resident Evil Requiem undoubtedly going to be a huge hit as it ushers in Resident Evil's 30th anniversary, this list is surely going to look very different in the next few years. Heck, even future Resident Evil remakes are going to really stir things up on this list, but at the end of the day, Resident Evil is more popular than ever, and that's something we can all be super happy about. Got nothing else for ya? Come find me over in this video as we go over the scariest moments in Resident Evil, ranked least scary to the absolute scariest. And I look forward to seeing you all real soon in the next one.